And in order to start the shading process, first of all, let's click on this little button here, which enables the Look Dev mode. The Look Dev mode basically adds a lighting setup to the scene, and it will also show us all the properties of the materials when we add materials to our objects. Right now, all these objects don't have materials, that's why they are just gray. So, and if I click on this little arrow up here, and on this ball, I can choose between different lighting setups for my scene. So for example, I can choose this one, and you can see how this changes the lighting in the scene here. And that's really important when you create a material, to check this in different lighting conditions to see if the material works good in different environments basically. So when you create an object for an animation, and while the animation is running, the lighting changes, or you have different scenes with the same objects, you need to make sure that this object always looks good, because the lighting has a big effect on how the object looks, and that's why it is important to check different lighting setups. So let's start with this one here, because this is relatively neutral. And in order to add a material to an object, all you need to do is to click on this little button here to the Material tab. Don't confuse this with the World tab, which looks quite similar. And then click on New to add a new material. First of all, in order to know what material belongs to what object, let's click in here. And let's call it Apple. Then in Blender we are working with so-called shader. Each shader has different properties, and in order to change the shader, you click behind Surface on this principled BSDF. If I click on that, you can see we have a shader list over here. Here we have, for example, a diffuse shader for a simple color, a glossy shader for a reflective material, an emission shader for glowing objects. We also have a mix shader to mix two different shaders together, and so on and so forth. But luckily we don't need that many shaders anymore, because we have this principled shader, which is also enabled by default, because this is basically one kind of Über shader which includes all the other stuff. So basically with this one shader we can create glossy and glass and diffuse materials all in one shader. So basically you don't need to switch anything, because down here we have all the settings for the principled shader, because the principled shader is enabled over here. So now when you look at all the settings down here, this might be a little bit overwhelming, but since we only need a very few of them, you will see that this is actually not that complicated. So let's take a look at the most important settings here for us. First of all, the base color. If I click on this white field, I can change the color and also the brightness. So pretty easy. Then the second most important value is the roughness over here, which defines how rough the surface should appear. So basically this will blur out the reflections in the object. If I set this to 0, as you can see, then we have a perfect smooth reflective surface. And if I set this to a higher value, then you can see this appears to be really rough. So depending on what kind of object you want to create, either a reflective plastic, for example, you use a very low roughness value, or for a concrete ground, you probably use a very high roughness value. Then the next important value is the metallic. So if this value is set to 0, we basically have a non-metallic material. So basically everything which is not metallic. But if we want to create a metallic object, we have to set this value to 1. Then you can see the appearance of the object changed. And if I now play around with the roughness, you can see that this really looks like a metallic apple right now. So also pretty easy. Let's set this back to 0. And the last thing I want to show you here is the transmission value. If I set this to 1, we basically have a glass material. So we have this nice refraction in here. Right now, it's only refracting this image here, which is basically put into the background of our scene and lights up our scene. But this is hidden here in the 3D viewport, so we can't really see it. But we can see it here through the refraction, but we can't see the ground, for example, or the knife in the background. And this we have to enable manually for the viewport, the real-time display of our scene. For that, scroll down here in the material settings, go to settings, and enable screen space refraction. And to make this work in general, we have to go to the render settings, enable screen space reflections. Then you can see we already have this nice real-time reflections on the object. And if I open this up, we also have to enable the refractions. And now, as you can see, also the ground and the knife will be incorporated into the refraction. So let's go back to the material, and that's basically everything. So the base color, metallic, roughness, and transmission. So now I want to show you how to add a simple texture to the object here. So first of all, let's set transmission down to 0. Also metallic should be 0. We just want to have a standard material. And instead of the base color, we want to use the texture. And for that, we click on this little dot behind the color. And here in the textures category, we choose image texture. Now you can see the color will be replaced with the texture. And now we can either open this from our hard drive, create a new plain image, or we can take a look into the library, because every image we load into Blender, no matter it is in the texture paint mode or for the textures or anywhere else, Blender will put the information into an image library and will remember everything we loaded into Blender. So we don't have to import this image once again, because the Apple Paint image is still in here. So simply click on that, and then this will be attached to the base color of this shader. So let's close this, and now you can see this apple has now this nice texture, and this will also display here perfectly in the 3D viewport. So this apple object now has a simple, very flat surface, which is reflective. Certainly we can play around with the roughness here to kind of match the look with a real apple. But what's really missing here are the imperfections. That means that the reflection is not everywhere the same, and maybe we have little bumps here and there on the surface. And this we also can create using our materials. So, but for that, I won't recommend to use this material tab here, because we basically can do everything here. We can add more informations if I click on those dots here. But basically all the information we add will just be listed underneath each other, and then you will just have a long list with a lot of values and you will get totally confused. So I don't recommend to do more than adding a simple texture and changing the base values here. For everything else, we need the shader editor. And for that, we simply go over here to the shading workspace. As you can see here in this shading workspace, we have a different arrangement of windows and editors. Up here we have our 3D window, also with the look dev mode enabled by default. So don't be confused with this little balls here, which is basically just a perfect reflective ball and a white ball, which shows the interaction with the lighting setup, which can be helpful as reference compared to what we create here. But for now, you basically can ignore those. Then over here, we have the file browser open if we want to add textures, but we will do it a bit differently. So we can right click on the edge here and click on join area, and left click on this window to remove this. And down here, we have the image editor enabled, but also we don't need it here. So right click on the edge, join area, and remove it. But what we need here is the shader editor, which is open down here. So if I click on that, you can see the shader editor is enabled. So, and the shader editor is basically just a different way to show everything we set up here in the material tab. So everything I do over here, for example, let's quickly change the roughness, and you will see that the roughness over in the shader editor will change as well, because everything here is basically mirrored over here, just in a different way. Here we use these nodes, and the nodes are driven by input and output. So let's left click somewhere to deselect everything, and then left click and hold to move a node around. This thing here is the texture I've plugged into the base color, and you can see that we have the texture here, Apple Paint, and the color output, so always the stuff on the right side of a node is the output, is plugged into the input on the left side here of this principal shader. So here we have a texture, here we have a shader, and everything which is calculated inside the shader will be outputted over here and will be transferred to the material output node and connected to the surface, which basically means that everything we do here will finally show up on the surface of this selected object. Just for your understanding, everything you see down here or over here is dependent on the selected object. So if I select the ground here, you can see we don't have any material yet. That means over here, nothing will show up. If I select the apple, you can see the connected apple material will show up here and here in the shader editor as well. So, and the shader editor compared to this menu over here is way more clear, since every aspect we add to the node tree here will be clearly visible all the time. So here, for example, if I open the texture settings, it will just be placed somewhere here in between all the other menus and sliders and settings, and it's not really clearly visible what belongs to what. But over here we can see clearly that this is our Apple Paint texture and we know exactly which settings belong to this node here or to this texture. And we can also see very clearly the relationship of this texture to all the other nodes here with the connections. In order to connect or disconnect nodes, you simply left click and hold on an input node, move it out and release your mouse button. Then this will be disconnected. Now you can also see that we still have the texture node, but it's not connected with the base colors. And then we only see the base color we set up here on the final model because this node sends the information to the surface of the object. In order to connect nodes, we left click and hold on an output dot here and simply move the noodle, this line is called noodle, to the input and release your mouse, and then this will be connected. You can also quickly disconnect two nodes by holding down Control, right click and hold and cut this. So this works as well. Then you can see that we have different colors for the input and output. This is also important. Basically, these colors define which nodes we can connect to what other nodes, but this we will learn while we are going.
Okay, so we have our UV image unwrapped, just like we learned before. Things are a little different in Blender 2.8, but we've got that together. And what we did was we switched over here. We went with the scroll wheel and we found the look development mode, which is this one right here, right? And our texture didn't show up, even though it's unwrapped and it's over here in the UV editor. So what we have to do is we have to apply a material. And in Blender 2.8, you have to go down here and find this red material tab. We're going to click New. Now we've got a material on there, but of course, there's something that we still need to do. And we learned about this in the tutorial earlier today. What is that we still need to do? Right? The important settings are color, base color, right? Metallic, roughness, and transmission. What do we need to do to get the image on there? We've learned about this before. We did it the same way before. Anybody in the class know? Tina knows. She has it on there. What do we have to do? Oh, you just changed the color. I got you. Okay. So, guys, to add the color, to add this image on here, you click on this little guy right here. And then you go down to image texture, remember? So go ahead and do that. And you don't need to click open. You can click on this little thumbnail right here. See that? Little picture icon right here? You can go and you can click on that and choose your seamless texture, and there it is. Now there's only one last thing that I want you to pay attention to here today before we talk about the bump map, okay? And that is the mapping and the size. Right here it says flat, box, right? All of these, remember these? This is flat, so we want it mapped flat. However, let's deal with the size now, okay? The size is going to be over here in the UV image editor. So if I go and I select all here, in the, oh, I'm back to, did it bump me back here? No, it didn't. I just need to be able to select all of these. It's because I'm in object mode. So if I go into edit mode here, I will see my vertices here, right? So take a look at your wood. This is a table. I'm going to go and select all of these, and I'm going to hit S. And how do I want this to look as a table? Your decision. You don't want to get too zoomed in, though. Word of warning, because things will be When we put the bump map on, it won't look right, okay? So I wouldn't leave it right here where it is. You could either make it fine, but things start to look kind of Minecrafty if you go too far there. Or you can go maybe into about, I wouldn't go further than about maybe here. So you don't need to make it look like mine. Choose a size for your texture. And of course, if you don't like the way the texture is going, you can touch R and you can rotate the texture, right? But I'm going to touch R90 and that would rotate it exactly 90 degrees. I actually don't want to do that, so I'm going to go and flip it back. So now I'm going to rotate another 90 degrees. R90, enter. And you can see that they're up and down. You can hit save, and we will deal with the roughness and the bump map tomorrow. Okay? So that's the new way of doing UV textures, just to get them on there. So save that. We'll pick up with that tomorrow.
So right now we just have the texture, we have the principled shader and the output node so that we can see everything over here. But as mentioned, I want to make the apple look a little bit more interesting. When you download texture packs online, for example on texturehaven.com, they will ship not only with the diffuse color, so the basic color, but also with different maps like a bump map, a normal map, a specular map, roughness map, and all these things. All these maps you basically can put into the shader editor and plug them into the right spot of the principled shader, and then everything looks perfect. However, in our case we have a custom made texture, so we texture painted the apple, we have a UV map, and we don't have all these maps. There are certain tools we can use or in Photoshop tweak everything so that we have kind of the other maps. But this is a time-consuming process, and this is nothing I want to discuss in this video. But I want to show you a quick and easy way how you can kind of mimic the effect of different maps on the model here with a quick and cheap setup. But in the end, it's just important how their final scene looks like. It doesn't have to be super realistic, but just has to look really good. So down here, we can add more nodes by clicking the Add button here, and then we have different categories. For example, here under shader, we can also find the principled shader. And as soon as I click on one of those nodes, this will be added. It now sticks to my mouse cursor, and with left click, I can place it. With X or delete, I can simply delete the selected node. I can also box select multiple and then left click and hold on them and move them around. With left click somewhere, we can deselect everything. By scrolling the mouse wheel, we can zoom in and out. And with middle mouse button click, we can pan the view here. So pretty straightforward. Instead of clicking the Add menu, similar as for the 3D view over here, we can also hit Shift A. This also worked in the 3D view. This also works down here. And in this case, it's very important to understand that the shortcuts we press only works in the editor where our mouse cursor is. So if I move my mouse cursor up here into the 3D view, press Shift A, you can see it opens the Add menu for the 3D view. And if down here I press Shift A, it opens the Add menu for the shader editor. And this applies also for all the other editors. If I use a certain shortcut, for example over here, I press Shift D because I want to duplicate the apple, but you can see nothing happens. But if I press here Shift D, the apple will be duplicated. So always take care where your mouse cursor is. So down here, let's hit Shift A, and the first thing I need is under Converter, the color ramp. So I will just add a bunch of nodes while we discuss all this stuff here. And these nodes seems to be kind of random and really strange to you. And this is totally fine, but in the end, you will see that we will use certain nodes over and over again. And for creating very simple shaders and materials, you don't need much nodes. So the few nodes we will use in this scene is in most cases, when you create simple materials, everything you need. So I will explain all the nodes we add here and what they are doing. So first of all, this is a color ramp node. You can see we have this black and white gradient over here. And what we can use this for is we can basically plug the color of the Apple Paint texture. So left click and hold, put this into the FAC value down here. You can see this will be replaced. And now if I temporarily connect the color output with a base color, we can see what happens inside of this node. This node uses a color output. This yellow dot always means color. This we connect with a gray input. Gray always means numeric or grayscale. This will basically convert the color into grayscale using this color ramp here. And with these two colors, the black and the white, we define what color the bright values of the texture should have and the dark. So basically all the dark values are now black and all the bright values are white or brighter. So we could also change the colors here. We can make it brighter and make this blue, and this one, for example, red. Now the bright values use the reddish color here and the dark values the blue color. So let's undo this because I want to have black and white. So when I now left click on those handles, hold and move them around, you can see that I can change the values. Basically, if I add more black here, you can see that we also add more dark values to the texture. Or the other way around, if I put the right value over here, everything gets brighter. And what do we need this color ramp for? Certainly not for the color. We don't want to have a black and white apple here. We want to have this for the roughness. So let's reconnect the color of the texture with the base color of the principal node. And now we want to output the color ramp and input this into the roughness. But before I do that, let's quickly take a look at the roughness value. If I set the value down to 0, you can see we have a perfect reflective surface. If I put this to 1, we have like a very rough surface. And the numbers 0 and 1 in values means basically 0 black and 1 white. And everything in between are grayscale values. So, and if we take a look at this color ramp again, we now have dark spots on this apple and bright spots. And that means on the dark spots, we basically have a roughness value of 0 or in general a very low value. And on all the bright spots, we have a relatively strong value. So the roughness is stronger. So, and if I now connect this with the roughness, you can see that this slider here will be replaced by our roughness map. So now let's reconnect the color. And now let's play around here a bit. And you can see how this is changing the surface. So you can see in some areas we have a little bit more glossiness and in other areas not. And in the end, I want to have a very wet looking apple because we will add some physical raindrops to the apple later on. So we kind of need some glossiness here and there. So I play around with these values until this looks good to me. What we also can do, we can select the dark values, click on the color down here and just make them brighter. That means we make the dark values brighter. That means we add more roughness to the very glossy areas. So that means no area here is like 100% glossy. We will tweak these values later on when we get to the lighting and rendering process so that from the camera perspective, everything looks perfect.
What we're going to do now is we're going to, I did go over into the material panel and I did rename the texture, the material that I have here. I went into here and I clicked on it and I renamed that. So the next thing is that we're going to move over into the shader editor. So find the shading editor and click on that. And things start to change now and your whole layout changes. So in your notes, write down switch to shader editor or shader editor. Shading, you could write shading tab, whatever you want to, because that's where we're going next. Great. So I don't have my table selected, so we're not seeing any nodes. But if I go and I select the table, you'll see that we already have nodes set up. So go ahead and click on your table. That's going to be a left click these days now. Okay. And also I am in object mode in this layout. So up here, take a look at object mode, make sure that it's here at object mode, or you can go and you can hit tab in this window and you can go and switch that way. Okay. So what we're talking about here is adding in and talking about color ramp, right? So we're going to need to be able to see what's going on here. And I'm going to take this light and I'm going to just move this down a little bit. You can do that with me because we're going to want to be able to see what the lighting is doing. All right. And I just, whoops, undo. I'm going to select that light and hit G and get that down there. But I'm not seeing any difference in my lighting. I think I might actually go and switch the layout. Let's see if this works. I'm going to switch to a darker view here as far as the lighting goes. And I'm wondering if that lighting is even showing up here. Doesn't really look like it is. So just let me go to the lighting and see if it's something I need to turn up or what. Not sure. So I think in look dev mode, this is new to me too, that you won't see these lights move around. So we may have to switch over into rendered view. So that's right here, rendered view. Okay, and now, yeah, that's going to be better for texturing is rendered view. So with my light selected, my lamp selected here, I can go and I can hit G and I can move that around and it kind of shows me. Go ahead, try that out. Try that out. Go ahead and move that back and forth and make sure you can see some sheen there. I'm going to go and actually just go and hit G from this view and move that over this way. And then maybe I'll just move it back a little bit this way. Okay. And again, we're dealing with the specularity, the shininess that is on the table. So that's what we're working on right now. So we want to be able to see that. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to select the light itself. Okay. So next we're going to go. So I would write that down in your notes as well. Switch to rendered view for shading. Switch to rendered view for shading. Rendered mode for shading. Okay. And applying materials. That is applying textures, I should say. Okay, so we've got this texture here. If I go this node setup, if I go and drag it, the whole thing moves. I need to click off once. So go ahead and click off once, and then move this one over. Do that, please. And I'm going to also move my screen up so you can see. You don't have to do this because you can zoom in on any of this stuff and you can really see things. You can hold the middle mouse wheel and you can pan around just like in regular, right? So this is our wood fine seamless texture here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a new node. You can see it's connected to the base color. And if we disconnect that, pull it off, we have nothing. We have no texture on our object, right? All right, so if I want to reconnect that, I just drag from color to base color and I'm back on, right? Okay, this is how nodes work. All right, so we're going to have to add in a color ramp. So you can hit Shift A or you can go to Add, and this is going to be a converter. Add converter and then color ramp. Now, to drop this in, it works a lot better if I just go and I drop it in right on top and click it and it connects automatically. Okay, and just like in the tutorial, we're seeing the same thing. Now I'm going to zoom in on this view and then pan up. Whoops, I need Shift to do that. Shift the middle mouse wheel to do this. And I'm going to kind of take a look at this so I can see the dark and the light and get a good view where I can kind of see it all. All right. And now, as you can see, just like in the tutorial, we can go and we can take the, oops, I need to click right on that thing. I'm going to zoom in so I can really get it. I can go and I can take this, and you can see I can change the texture this way if I wanted to. I can click on this color stop, and I can change that as well. Right? And that's what he was doing in the tutorial. Now, instead though, I'm going to unplug this and I'm going to go and I'm going to connect this to the roughness. And then I'm going to connect the color back over to the base color here. So I'm going to get color back in and I'm going to go and take a look at this. Now, it might be a little difficult to see. Got to get in the right view here. All right. So I'm going to get somewhere where I can see some sheen. See that? See that sheen there? See that little bit of a reflection there? And I recommend that you don't open up your node window as wide as mine is here, because you'll be able to see what you're working on then. I'm just leaving my nodes up so that you can see what you're doing, okay? So now let's go and adjust this. So I can go and click on the color ramp, the black stop, double click on it to move. Oh, this is a little finicky. Oh, it looks like you need to move the arrow. Okay. So I move that up, and you can see it turns into like it is covered in, take that black and move it like halfway up, and then take a look. The reflection of that light turns out to be like a, boy, it looks like it's wet, like it's water, right? See that reflection? And then if I go and I take that back down, you can see that it changes, right? And now if I wanted it to be very rough, I would go, I believe, yes, and like it was concrete, right, or rubber, like a dull rubber, I could go and I could take the white down. All right, so by his suggestion there in the tutorial, we can go and we can double click on the black and until we see black here. So this is a little tricky, I see. Oh, never mind, use the arrows. It's the arrows that you want. Use the arrows and then change this black to something that is a little bit more gray. And that will give us a little more control. And now I want you to zoom in so you can see what you're doing, and I want you to apply the specularity, the roughness that you think this table should have. It is a table, a kitchen table. It's not going to be super duper wet looking. And this is all just kind of you deciding what you want it to look like. First time, so just do your best. Keep on kind of rotating your view. I wanted mine to be kind of glossy, so I'm rotating and looking at that while I rotate. By the way, remember we have view selected if you're not seeing what you want to see.